Good afternoon, government class. All right, so I should have already handed out to you all the things you need for the mock trial. If you have any questions with that, remember to please just come talk to me. I'll be here tomorrow, though, and so we can go over that then. And then I believe it is either this Friday or next Friday is going to be our first work day on that. And so we'll go into more details about that later. For now, though, I believe that you have just finished correcting your reading guide about our unalienable rights. So let's go ahead and get started with the notes then for today. So the first thing I want to talk about, and we made this distinction in the definitions in your textbook, there are two different guarantees in the Constitution. There are civil liberties, which are your protections against the government, and so these are the things that kind of protect you from things that the government could do to you. So for example, it allows you to freely express your opinion without the government taking any sort of action against you, or from individuals taking action against you necessarily. It also provides you the right to hold your property. Civil liberties, that liberties thing is going to be anything where you are being protected from the government so that you have freedom to do things. The opposite of that is civil rights, positive acts of government. So these are things that the government is doing for you. That's what that positive acts mean. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything the government is doing is a positive thing, but it's meaning that the government is acting in your favor. Or is acting to give you something that you can do. So for example, the right to vote for all is something that the government has actively given to you, so it's a positive act. The right and the guarantee of equality under the law, that every person will be treated equally, that's something the government must actively do. It's not something we're protected from the government for. It's something the government actively enforces and actively does. You could even consider possibly safety and security in your home. If the government is actively protecting you in that, then that would be a form of a civil right. All right, I like the title of this one, The Truth is Relative. And what we mean by this, and we've kind of talked about this already before, is that even though all Americans have equal rights, even though we all have lots of rights, those rights are relative. They depend on the situation. The best thing I like, the best expression that I like is your rights are basically unlimited until they infringe upon someone else's rights. So for example, from the freedom of speech, you cannot harm another person with your speech. That is something where your rights end. And you can also not incite terror. So for example, there was a Supreme Court case, and one of the conclusions that came out of that Supreme Court case is a classic where yelling fire in a crowded movie theater is not protected speech. Because even though there may not actually be a fire and there may not actually be danger, the terror that you have caused is considered to be a wrong and something you are not protected from. So there you go. You've actually learned a form of speech that you're actually not allowed to do. We do also know that all persons, according to the Constitution, are given most rights, and this includes aliens. Aliens are just people who are in our country and who are not citizens. In your book, it talked about how there are some rights that aliens do not have. For example, most everyday citizens have the right to travel where they please. Aliens, on the other hand, can have their travel heavily regulated. Critical to all of this is the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment makes the rights outlined, in the first 10 amendments, in the Bill of Rights. It makes those rights apply equally to all the states. There was kind of an interesting thing when the Constitution was originally created, that the guarantees of the Bill of Rights would only apply to laws created by the national government, and the state governments basically could make their own laws that would contradict the Constitution. The 14th Amendment makes this not true, and asserts the national government and the Bill of Rights above state laws. And there are two important clauses in the 14th Amendment, and we will discuss this a little bit more when we get to the next chapter in your book. But the two different clauses are the Equal Protection Clause, which guarantee similar rights to all citizens, and the Due Process Clause. The Due Process requires that the government take its time and that you are given your full rights of appeal, to know why you're being charged before any sort of punishment or before any of your rights are taken away. There has to be a sort of process that's gone through before you have your rights taken away. These are the critical aspects of the 14th Amendment. And again, like I said, this is something we'll go into a lot more detail in a couple of weeks. One thing that the 14th Amendment does is something called the process of incorporation, where basically it combines the guarantees of the Bill of Rights into state laws. This is where I was talking about where originally the first 10 amendments were not considered to be laws that the states had to abide by. They were just laws that the national government had to go with. The process of incorporation is basically taking these first 10 amendments, these Bill of Rights, and applying them to state laws. So far from Supreme Court cases, we know that the First Amendment, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments have all been guaranteed at the state level. A good example of this was a man named Clarence Gideon, who I've mentioned before, longtime crook who robbed a pool hall. He, however, was not represented by an attorney when he had his case in the state of Florida. The Constitution should have granted him that protection, but the Florida State Supreme Court said no, he didn't have to have that protection. The Supreme Court, though, eventually would overturn that decision because they stated that the 14th Amendment made those guarantees, the right to an attorney, part of what he should have had, even as a state citizen. And that is it. So as a quick recap, what is an example of a civil right? What do we mean when we say that rights are relative? And the funnies for today. It's so much cheaper. This is definitely true. And finally, alright, and that is it. So seniors, you may either watch CNN Student News or Mrs. Schuster may just have you sit and chat with each other, but either way, please use the rest of the time in class wisely. I will be back tomorrow and we will be able to talk a little bit more about the mock trial come tomorrow. But other than that, have a good day.